This video is brought to you by Patreon provider Lucas.
I hear something.
Pew! Pew!
No! Hold still. This won't hurt a bit.
Pew!
Hello there. It's good to see you. You look terrible. I'll stay here. All right.
Pew!
Psst. Over here.
Pew! Pew!
How interesting. Just look at that.
Pew! Pew!
Greetings!
If you already watched the first focal plane version of the 6T video I did, you will clearly see that this thing is already superior in a couple of ways. It might not be with the MOA milling reticle that you see here in second focal plane, but as far as the overall brightness, capable brightness without putting extra batteries in it or anything like that, this is already vastly superior. We see much less of the scope body, and there is no bleed back at the higher brightness settings, which is nice to see. It has the exact same controls as the first focal plane, and that's about it. There isn't really a whole lot else to say. The MOA milling reticle is very simple and basic. It wouldn't be my first choice, but it might be for you. Anyway, the illumination is excellent, and we see very little of the scope body, and so far the image looks to be pretty good. I won't lie, this is the first focal plane version that I am twisting the turrets on, but they're identical between the two. They're both phenomenal. We're just going to go up and down, because this is an MOA, and my target is in mils. A lot of elevation. Turns to 0. More than enough to set this up however you want. What? You see that, ladies and gentlemen? At this point in time, I check to make sure that everything is tight. I go over the mount, I go over all of the bases, I go over everything. Everything is nice and tight. As you saw, the elevation was fine, but the windage gains and loses as we track side to side. Let's try that again. Adjusting the windage raises and lowers it ever so slightly. Hard to see, but I want to go to the right, which will bring the reticle to the left, and it's going to go 1, 2, 3, 6, 7, about 7 clicks, and you can see that we've dropped off that top line just a little smidgen. And I'm going to go to the left, which will bring the reticle to the right. We're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. About 8. You see the distance to the top of the paper from the top of the horizontal plane of the reticle? Oh, ho, ho, that's not good. I don't like that one bit. We're going to go here, and you can see the big drop that we have. See what happens if we go a little bit farther out. Bring it back. See, that gap is exactly the same. And it actually looks like it goes back down. Oh, look at that. I think if we go farther to the right and then back left, this might actually start to jog itself farther down. be a long one, folks, but I'm curious to see what happens. As you can clearly see, there's something clearly loose inside. Something is definitely wrong. Will hopefully get sent out and checked, but it's not what I would, consider to be good. I've said it before, and I will say it again. There is a great divide between first focal plane and second focal plane LPVOs, especially in this 1 to 6 category. The illumination is clearly significantly brighter. For many of you, that won't matter. For those of you that it does matter, such as myself, this is superior. There is basically zero shift to the power lines as we transverse them. The image on this thing at 1x is supremely flat, clear, and crisp. Overall resolution, colors, brightness is excellent, frankly. It's, I would say, on par with the Credo HX, which is basically the Stryker HD 1 to 6. I believe all three of these optics are manufactured basically on the same assembly line, with the exception of this 6T being assembled in the US for military reasons. Now, that's not a bad thing. It just means that the price is going to go higher. But you do have a really cool color to this one. I love the FDE. I like the fact that it has a locking illumination control. The other two do not. The image between the three of them we're actually going to take a look at momentarily, but for right now, let's admire what this thing is giving us. It's giving us a very nice usable image. There is zero shift to the exit pupil from minimum to maximum magnification. Here at 6x, that is a crystal clear image center to edge, all the way around. Everything is in focus, basically from right up close and personal to about 800 yards, which we'll confirm soon. I will be rolling out a comparison video between this second focal plane version and the first focal plane version of the 6T very soon to give you guys a clear, definitive answer showing you how much better this is than the first focal plane version. We have, with the exception of the illuminated reticle, we have much less the scope ID that we're seeing, a much more forgiving Eyebox, and just a much superior image overall. There's basically nothing funky happening with the glass. There's no real chromatic aberration. We have plenty of contrast with those bricks between the light and the dark ones. At 400 yards, we're able to clearly identify that. Brown door with a bronze knob, you could see all that. It's very, very good. Here, pushing it out to 800 yards with those 30-yard power lines in the forefront at 6x, you don't need a better image than this. Now, with that being said, are there better options out there as far as overall maximum sharpness, clarity, and brightness and whatever? Probably still the Razor HD Gen 2E. I would say that's probably got just the edge. Plus, that's going to have a much larger appearing image. I might have to buy one so this way I could use that as the baseline, as the benchmark for the second focal plane 1 to 6 LPVO. But this thing is not that much far behind it. If you're looking for this exact optic, at least you know that this thing is going to perform so far very well, with the exception of that little bit of a tracking issue. But SIG's known to have pretty good warranty work, so if that is an issue, or if you have an issue in the future, at least SIG should be able to cover you. Now let's take a look at the same exact area a couple hours later. It's quite dark out. I got home a little bit too late, but it's still going to represent what you're going to be capable of seeing through this optic in a darker environment. Because light transmission during the day is going to be a little bit different from light transmission at night. You can see the optic is a little bit darker than what the ambient area is around it. That's going to be expected of almost any optic. The limitations of a 30mm tube, a 24mm front objective, is just light transmission. But we still have a decent amount coming through. Illumination, despite the fact we just had it on its maximum, does not bleed back like the first focal plane. That is another huge win for this, because the bleed back on that was so bad. If you had it even just a half a notch too high, you couldn't see through it. We can easily make out some of the larger objects on that brick building at 400 yards. You're not going to make out every single pane of glass, but again, that's not inside this optics wheelhouse. What will be inside this optics wheelhouse is short range, short to medium range engagement. And here at 50 yards, again, you can see that there is zero shift from inside the scope to outside the scope. That black berm above the targets is basically perfectly in line. The concrete wall on either side, again, is perfectly in line. We have a very crystal clear, beautiful image. We do have a little bit of flaring going on behind it, but that's only because of the way the sun was hitting the rear lens. You're going to have that with any optic if the sun's on or any lights on it, so wear a hat and it should mitigate that for the most part. Cropping the image, everything is just phenomenal here at 1x. And I will say, this compared to the first focal plane while getting behind it in drills is a little bit easier. The first focal plane wasn't unusable by any stretch of the imagination, but this was just a much easier optic to get behind. Center your eye on it a little bit easier with the brighter reticle, and it just seems to be a little bit more forgiving. Despite the fact that the fixed parallax on this optic is 150 meters, here at 6x at 50 yards, the image is still more than usable. Anything inside that 150 meters is going to be a little bit out of focus as opposed to at that distance or even beyond. But that's fine, because this image, frankly, is more than usable. Even if you had to go for groups, it's perfectly fine. But again, this is not a precision optic. LPVOs are not designed to be used for shooting super tight groups at any distance. They're used for fast drills on plates like this or full-size IPSC targets, not, F-class. Continuing with the 6T second focal plane domination over its first focal plane brother, we come to the Eyebox and exit pupil. And again, everything on this is vastly superior to the first focal plane version, especially with the illumination. As you can clearly see, it goes all the way out to the outer edge of the glass, even in the shadows, and is still visible. For someone like myself, it is a useful tool to help me figure out where the center is. Here at 4x, we have the exact same sort of performance. Anytime you start going up in magnification, it's always going to get tighter. It's just the way it is. But at least with here, again, you can see the illumination when you're way off center, as opposed to the first focal plane version where it wasn't as forgiving as this, but both were still better than the loopholed Mark 6, which, if you even had a perfect cheek weld, still didn't mean you were going to see the illumination properly. 6x is typical of any 6x optic. It's tight, but that's going to be the case for most magnified optics at its highest setting. Make sure you have a good cheek weld and a good position on the rifle, and you shouldn't have any problems. As we move on to the large bore range, we're going to start getting to my final thoughts and some comparisons between this optic and some of its very stiff competition. This thing is good, borderline, very good, with the exception of that tracking issue. Hopefully, Lucas will send this into SIG and they'll fix it for him, and he'll let me know what goes on, so this way I can report back to all of you. For the price, you're getting mostly what you're paying for. This is assembled in the US, so that is going to jack the price up, but I don't necessarily mind that because at least American workers are getting their hands dirty and feeding their families. And who doesn't like that? And if you are planning on building a military clone rifle, this optic might be one of your choices, so at least you know it's pretty good. But this thing is not without its competition. In fact, I feel it's up against some of the strongest competition. That includes the Delta Stryker HD, the Credo HX, and of course, the Razor HD Gen 2. Whether it be the E or the non-E, they're basically the same with the exception of the weight. These four LPVOs all feature second focal plane reticles, and basically all the same features, with the exception that this 6T and the Razor HD have locking illumination turrets, whereas the other two do not. However, this 6T comes in at around $1,400. The Razor HD Gen 2s, I've seen the E's go for about $1,000, which is just nutty for the price. It's just, they were $1,400 not that long ago. After that, we have the Credo HX at around $800 and the Stryker HD for around $700 and change, sometimes a little bit less. People usually buy those from Darn Fine Optics, and apparently they get really good deals on them sometimes, so that's where I would check if you're interested in the Stryker HD. Now, before I go ahead and show you some comparisons between this optic and those three, which would I have right off the bat? I'd probably still stick with the Razor HD. It's just that second type of cool. Everything about it is just next level excellent. But right behind that is the Credo HX. And right on its heels, and I mean almost indistinguishable, is the Stryker HD. Those three LPVOs play at such a high level, it's really splitting hairs between which one is quantifiably better than the other. It mostly comes down to personal preference, reticle options, colors, whatever manufacturers you like, you name it. But they're all, I think, a touch better than this SIG, and they're all less expensive as well. As far as which warranty is the best, Vortex hands down. I just recently sent my Credo 2-10 out to Trigicon to have them check it up. It's been way too many months in the making, but I finally did it, and they have been so far exceptional as far as getting back to me. Communication's been excellent, so I'll see how that all works out soon. I have not really heard much about Delta's warranty, but I'm sure it's going to be okay. And SIG's is extremely good as well, albeit I have not had to test it, but if Lucas tests it, I'll let you know. Whatever optic you decide to go for, please, for the love of God, invest in a high-quality mount. I personally run All American Defense Recons. They're about $200. They've served me extremely well and will continue to do so for as long as I run this channel and even beyond, because they're on most of my guns. But you don't have to spend $200 to get a really good mount. I've done mount reviews. Go check them out. The Midwest Industries mount is probably the best bang for the buck, as long as you're okay with the QD levers being on the right-hand side, or the half-inch locking nuts for their non-QD version. Anyway, let's put this up against some of its rivals with whatever footage I can muster, only because I don't have these things side by side to really open up my library to perfect comparisons, but just to give you an idea of what to expect. I'm actually going to start here with still my favorite, the Razor HD on the right and this on the left. Back when I was filming many years ago, I just wasn't in the groove yet, and thus nothing was really sort of standardized. Now I've really standardized on exactly how I do things. Despite all that, though, the Razor HD, you could see from the corners just how little of the scope body you see. It literally melts to the human eye. It's just, you're looking through a piece of glass that's floating in thin air. It is undescribable other than that. Despite the fact that this thing is not filmed in the proper way with my old camera. I'm now filming with a new camera in 4K, and it's been phenomenal. You can still see just how good the image quality is on the Razor. Hopefully I'll get another one in sooner rather than later, so this way I'll actually film that and review it again, just because I didn't do it proper justice the first time around. I'm also going to do the same thing with the P4XI, because I still think that thing is a viable option. The next competitor is going to be the Stryker HD. This 1:6 variant is still an excellent option. You can take note of how much less of the scope body you can see. For people like myself, that is a very welcome sight, because it just makes the overall experience that much better. Speaking of better experiences as a whole, the field of view, albeit a little bit hard to see between these two, the Stryker wins out as well. At 100 yards at 1x, it is 35.6 meters to the Stryker and 32.5 to the SIG. At 6x at 100 yards, you have 5.9 meters to the Stryker and 5.3 to the SIG. And that is a bit of a difference. More field of view is always more gooder. Always. Yes. As far as the colors, two different seasons completely, couldn't get much farther apart. The colors, I think, would probably go to the Stryker. The image goes to the Stryker just a little bit. But again, it's just a much better experience and for a lot less money. Our final comparison of the review is of the Credo HX on the right. And guess what? The field of view difference is even larger than that of the Stryker HD. Trigicon claims at 100 meters at 1x, you see 37.8 meters. That's 5 more than the SIG. And at 6x at 100 meters, you see 6.3 meters, which is a full meter larger than the SIG. I didn't talk about it earlier, but how does the Razor HDE stack up against all of these guys? Well, it falls right in between the Stryker HD and the Credo HX. At 100 meters, it claims 35.1 meter and 6.2 meters. So it wiggles its way in between the Stryker and the HX exquisitely. I think that's part of the reason why it's so much more enjoyable to get behind both the Razor, the Stryker, and the Credo as opposed to the SIG. You have a larger field of view, you have much less of the scope body being seen, and it's just a better experience. Anyway, on that note, ladies and gentlemen, I want to finish this out while you're looking through this Credo because I think it's excellent. This is still a good optic if it strikes every chord that you want. Lucas, thank you so much for sending this in for review. I had an absolute blast. And to all of you out there watching this, thank you all very much for watching. And of course, I'll see you again next time. And a very huge thank you to all of my Patreon providers. Without you, this wouldn't be possible. If you'd like to help support the channel but don't want to join my Patreon, I completely understand. But you can still help support by using my affiliate links in the description below. Thanks again for watching.